Midgley. She, and I want to introduce her briefly, she told me to keep it short. She holds an MSc in agriculture and a PhD in botany and has over 30 years experience in botanical, agricultural and climate change research in South Africa and in Southern African region. Her main fields of expertise are agricultural production technologies to improve yield, product quality and water use efficiency, and to reduce climate change, climate risk, climate variability, climate change impact, vulnerability and adaptation, as well as climate-related disasters, particularly relating to agriculture and climate-smart agriculture and sustainable natural resources use. She has a strong track record in scientific publications, conducts regular technology transfer to the agricultural sector, and has received several awards for outstanding research and leading the team that developed the Smart Agri Plan for the Western Cape agricultural sector. And she's at present the specialist scientist for climate change at the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, and also an extraordinary associate professor in horticultural science at our university here at Stellenbosch. Welcome, Professor Midgley. We hear you now speaking about the climate change crisis, the power of hope-based engagement and collective action. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was lucky enough to also be here on Tuesday and part of yesterday. And I've really been enjoying being in your company and listening and learning. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great privilege. So I'm going to be talking about climate change. And since I am a scientist, I can't resist but giving you some of the scientific background, just to expound a little bit on what are we actually facing? What is this crisis that we're talking about? Is it really so bad? Bishop Mzimand on Tuesday said we are on a collision course. What is meant by that? So I'm going to give you a little bit of the understanding, the knowledge that we have of what is happening, and especially also here for us, where we live in the Western Cape. But then the second part of my presentation, I'm going to change course a little bit and go into territory that I don't usually go into when I give presentations to farmers or to scientists. But it's been a challenge and a great pleasure to delve into this, because I want to try to share with you what we have learned around the science. The knowledge is not enough. It's not making the change we need. Scientists are not being listened to anymore worldwide. It's becoming a problem. But the politicians and the business leaders are also failing us. So how are we going to translate what we know about this crisis into real action? What does it mean for real people on the ground? How are we going to get things to change? How are we going to inspire action that is really going to turn this around? And I'm going to draw on some of my personal experiences. I do a lot of engaging with farmers across the whole province. I've also engaged in previous positions with farmers across Southern Africa. And I think I do understand how they make decisions and how they see this. And it's quite interesting. I'll bring some of that into my sciences, into my discussion as well. But at the end of the day, I want to focus on what I think is the solution. And I must admit, it doesn't come from me. It comes from somebody that I admire very much. And I will also explain a little bit where that inspiration comes from and this person. This person and many other people now in the climate change world are saying, we have to change the way we do things. We need a transformation with every single person getting involved and bringing something to the table. And we need to make it real, and we need to find out what those levers are. And it starts with conversations, it starts with community, it starts with hope, and then collective action amongst ordinary people is what is going to really get us out of this trouble. I'm going to start with a study that has just been published. This is the 20th iteration of an annual report that the World Economic Forum does every year based on what are the big risks that are facing our world at present. They've been doing this for 20 years, and the 2025 one has just been published. It always makes for very interesting reading. And we see that this year things have changed a little bit. Some things are changing, some things are not from previous years. What is not changing is that for several years now, we have seen that environmental risks, including climate change, water crisis, disasters, the global ecosystem breakdown, these things are now half of the list of the top 10 risks facing the Earth at the moment and humankind. That is in the 10-year frame. In the 2-year frame, we have gone from having a very large list of environmental threats in the 2-year frame to a shift that is taking place where people are now prioritizing things like misinformation, disinformation, inequality, and threats of AI, etc. But the environment is also still there. So we see that extreme weather is still the second top risk in the next 2 years, as is pollution. And then as we go into the 10-year frame, we see many of the other threats that are linked to climate change as well. But we also notice that the social risks are very high. And those are the red ones on those lists. The risks of inequality, of social polarization, of forced migration, these things are also huge risks globally at the moment. And so importantly, these things are connected. And I think as scientists, as biophysical scientists, people working in climate change, we do a lot of data crunching, modeling, etc., mapping, and I will show you some maps, I can't resist that. But I think what I'd like to show here is that the interconnectedness of these things is making even the scientists realize that we have to do this as a systemic approach. We have to take people into account and their lived realities. And you'll see the big red dots in the middle. Those are the big social risks. They are right in the center of the highest impact of all of these risks that are all interconnected. And then you'll see the environmental ones, or the green ones on the left. And they're also part of it, and they are connected to those social risks. They're connected through things like forced migration and health issues. And I will address some of those in some of the upcoming slides. So this makes for very interesting reading. But then what do we do with this? The second one I want to just bring up is something that was developed by Professor Johann Rockström of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research in Germany. And this is now being widely used by many, many scientists working in this space, looking at the health of the planet. How do we measure this? How do we know if we are in a dangerous zone, or everything is still fine and we just need to do a few things and we'll be fine? Or are we really heading towards this collision that people are fearing? And this what they call the planetary boundaries framework, is a framing around 9 processes that really make the world function, make the world livable for nature, for us, for humans. And you'll see those now and there. I'm not going to go into the details. Climate change is one of them. Biogeochemical sciences, nitrogen, phosphorus, and all those are another, and so on. But the important thing is that the green bit in the middle is what they call the safe operating space for humanity. That green is what Earth provides for us to live sustainably healthy lives on this Earth. We have already exceeded that green, the safe operating space, in 6 out of the 9 variables that are there. Oh, I'm sorry, there we go. I'll leave this up a little while longer so you can see. You'll see the nine processes there, and the green in the middle, the safe operating space. So as I said, we are rapidly exceeding many of these, and they are the basis of what makes life possible on this Earth. So this is of great concern. There are these tipping points, or tipping elements, where we get to a certain point where the breakdown is irreversible, and we've pushed the Earth too far, and it's not going to be able to go back. The Earth is very resilient, and nature is very resilient, but there are going to be those areas where we aren't going to be able to go back. And so this is what this framing does. And this is just a summary of where we are at the moment. This is the planetary health check of 2024, where they've used all these variables, and they've figured out where are we on this space between the safe space and the very high risk zone. And the safe space is the green, the orange, yellow in the middle, up to the red line it's risky, yes, it's risky, and then the red going all the way through to the right-hand side, the dark red is high risk. We are getting very close to that red line, which is where we are getting into dangerous change on Earth. So I think all of you know this, but I am going to show it because we must just remind ourselves what is actually happening in terms of global warming. I'm not going to talk about what's causing it. It's a whole lecture on its own and conversation. But this graph just shows the change in temperature that's happened since 1850 up to the present, and this graph goes up to 2024. It's the latest data. And it shows the baseline, which is basically 1850 to 1900, was very, very stable. And then we started having the temperatures going up. What is really concerning is the last year. Well, first of all, the last 10 years have been the 10 warmest on record. That's one thing. Then last year, the global average surface temperature was 1.55 degrees above that baseline. That is of great concern. If you've heard about the Paris Agreement, where all countries around the whole world in 2015 had signed an agreement to say we need to deal with this, we need to tackle it. The target there is that we need to keep it below 1.5 degrees warming, at most 2, but above 2 is dangerous. But we have to do everything possible to keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Last year, we exceeded that threshold. That does not mean that we have lost, that we are beyond the 1.5. It just means 1 year is already out of line. Now we're going to see there will be some cooler years and some warmer years as we go forward. That trend line, when the trend line exceeds 1.5, that is when we can say, oh, we have not succeeded in the Paris Agreement. And I'm going to then just show you one slide of the Western Cape. And I know many of you are not from the Western Cape. We do have a lot of information as well of what's happening nationally and in Southern Africa on climate change. We are warming just as rapidly as the rest of the world. In some parts of the country, we are seeing excessively high rainfall. That is also part of climate change. In the winter rainfall region here in the Southwestern Cape, we're seeing drying. And the modeling, the science shows that in the longer term, that is where we expect to be heading. So the Western Cape, not only warming, but also drying. We have a Mediterranean climate, which means that we are a little bit like southern France or Spain or Tunisia or California. We have the same kind of climate, winter rainfall and dry summers, which is very challenging for agriculture. And if we are going to be drying even more, we have very limited water resources already, and they fall in winter, so we have to catch them in dams. That becomes a real problem. So these maps just show, and I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but the top left-hand one is autumn, top right-hand one is winter, and then we go to spring, bottom left, and summer, bottom right. And the red colors show that there's been a significant drying already of autumn in this province. We divide it into agro zones, so when we go to the farmers in each region, we can tell them exactly, this is your historical climate, this is what's already happening in your area, and this is what we expect the future to look like. And so these maps are really, really concerning. It means that those frontal systems, anybody who lives in the Western Cape knows that these weather systems, the rain comes from these frontal systems. They are not coming as often as they should and bringing the rain that they should be. So we have a lot of scientific knowledge around this. Almost too much for the farmers, so we have to really hold back sometimes to just bombard them with a lot of maps and information because they really want to know what am I going to do about it and how are you going to support me. And then the last bit is, sorry, was that up? I didn't see. I think I'm pressing the wrong button here. There we go. The last bit I want to talk about is that climate change is a long-term shift in climate systems across the world. But in the short term, we are already experiencing climate change as increases in extremes and disasters, climate disasters. And at this point, I would just like to point out that we are in the middle of a disaster crisis in the Eastern Cape. You may have heard that terrible flooding. More than 40 people have died in the flooding this week, and it's ongoing. So let us keep those people in our thoughts and prayers. These things are happening way too often in this country, almost on every month, 2 months, we're having a disaster. The International Panel for Climate Change, and the last assessment report that came out in 2021, they said categorically, it is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, making extreme events, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, droughts, more frequent and more severe. So what we say is that these events are not new. We've always had events like droughts and floods and so on, but they are getting more frequent, they're getting more extreme, the impacts are higher. And that is what climate change is doing. It's supercharging our climate system. Some of the impacts, and I'm going to keep this very brief because I want to get to the second half of my talk. And these are some of the things we've been dealing with only in the Western Cape in the last few years. The day zero drought was exceptionally severe for our farmers. We had farmers in some parts of the province who had a drought for 8 years before it was broken. The city thought it was terrible having 3 years and struggled to deal with that. The farmers had to deal with 8 years of drought. Then we had, shortly after that, we had a lot of fires. We remember the Knysna fires, fires in townships with devastating impacts. In 2023-24, we had a series of very extreme rainfall events that caused flooding across the province. Huge damages, going into billions and billions of rands damage just for the agricultural sector on infrastructure. And then last year we also had very severe storm winds in the Karoo, which is something that appears to be a new thing that's now happening as well. And farmers are telling us stronger winds, and those blew down the Eskom pylons, and the people in the central Karoo didn't have electricity for 15 days, with very severe impacts across all of society. Medicines going off, food going off, and there was a lot of support was needed to help feed people and support before that pylons could be replaced. So these things are causing a lot of damage already. Climate change is not something in the future. It's really impacting our people on the ground, and it's impacting the most vulnerable people, and especially rural people, disproportionately. We know that not all of these things are terribly well understood, but what we do understand, and you'll see on this graph, high on the x-axis, high on the y-axis, is how well we understand these kinds of disasters and how much we can attribute it to climate change. You'll see that extreme cold, the reduction in extreme cold because of climate change, and the increase in extreme heat because of climate change. Those are things we actually understand very well. They're not disputed. We know that they are being super-driven by climate change. Then we get droughts and floods. Rainfall is a bit more tricky because rainfall is so variable. Rainfall changes every year. It changes in cycles from 10, 20, 30-year cycles. But we do know also to some extent that we have some confidence that those things are being made more extreme now. And then there are other things like thunderstorms and fires and insects and all sorts of other impacts that we don't understand so well. We think they're being influenced by climate change, but we need a lot more knowledge around that. Right, this is a study that was done it was done globally as part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, but it shows specifically for food production, crops, livestock, and fisheries, what the trajectory is in terms of climate change. We know that climate change is going to reduce food production from crops and fisheries and livestock, especially in Africa. And if you see that circle there, that is the one to look out for. We're in the yellow band, which means that we have a moderate risk at the moment of climate change affecting food production, food security. But we are rapidly moving. As I said, this line that is shown there in the orange is where we were about 5-6 years ago. We are now rapidly approaching the orange area, which is the area of high risk. And we saw again last year very large reductions in food production across southern Africa because of drought. And the studies have shown that agricultural productivity growth has been reduced by 34% since 1961 because of climate change. So there's a real risk of escalating food insecurity across the region. We heard Mr. Boyson yesterday also speak about food insecurity and the fact that that is increasing in South Africa. The latest report shows that it's increased from 15.8% 2019 to almost 20% in 2023. And severe food insecurity is 8% of our population. That is a tragedy. That should not be the case. We do expect that in future, we are still fairly food secure at a national level, but we do expect in future that not only food accessibility and affordability for poor people is going to become more of an issue with shortages causing hikes in food prices, but also food production is going to start becoming more and more affected. And then the last one, or second last one, in terms of what the impacts are, is health. And this is where I want to start making the connections to people. We're working closely with the Department of Health and Wellness as well in the Western Cape, who are now really, really onto climate change as a real risk and threat to the services that they also have to provide and the kind of diseases and conditions that they're seeing. Obviously very, very worried about air quality and poor water quality, but also heat, extreme heat, and all the effects of heat that go with that, especially people who work outdoors. Then allergies are being made worse, insect and foodborne diseases are being made worse, and all of this, of course, as I said, food insecurity. The Department of Health is looking at this closely, and we really need to more and more in future work together to make sure that access to nutritious, sufficient, healthy food becomes a real priority across this province. This is a slide that is used internationally in the climate change space, also in the disaster space, the risk reduction of disasters, where people have tried to figure out what actually constitutes risk to people, to human beings. We see the risk in the middle there. It's not only the hazards. So I think for far too long, scientists have focused very much on the hazards, the extreme heat, the rainfall, the drought, etc. That we need to know about. We need to know about exposure. Some people are more exposed. So people who are putting up their houses in a drainage line, in a river, because there's nowhere else for them to live, they are at very, very high risk. People who live in poor quality housing are highly exposed. People who work outdoors are highly exposed. So not everybody has the same risk. Somebody who works in an office with air conditioning is not going to feel the same effects as poorer people. And then vulnerabilities, and this is where we have considerations of age, gender, mobility, access to care, and all of these things that come into play when we need to support people to try and reduce their risks, but also to help them when something's happened. So all of this brings me to a slide that I'm going to now stop with the bad news, and I'm going to try and get on to what I think where the solutions can lie. All of this actually it shows us that this is a global social and a justice issue. Pope Francis said in 2023, climate change is a social issue. It can't be parked with environment, and the environmental people are going to deal with it. No. It's a social, it's a humanitarian issue. I almost want to say it's a humanitarian crisis in some parts of the world. We know that climate change is already arresting and reversing some of the gains made in the Sustainable Development Goals. Land degradation, lack of safe water, extreme heat. There are areas of this world, especially in the Arab areas, North Africa, where whole areas are becoming uninhabitable. Hunger, malnutrition, other health problems, displaced persons, forced migration, refugees. These things are already happening. There's been a lot of research that shows the linkages that the migrations we're seeing across the world now, this new wave of migration, is partially driven by climate change. Intergenerational justice, just transition, especially on the energy transition, but we also believe in agriculture that there has to be a just transition in agriculture. And breakdown of trust in science, in government, and in industry is a real problem. And because of all of this, people are really fearful. They're either trying to ignore it, or they are fearful. They're anxious, especially young people are very anxious. Some are so anxious that it actually goes into anger. Greta Thunberg is a good example. That anger, it comes from a realization of what we are heading into, and that not enough is being done to reverse it. Right, I'm going to skip that now, except to say that all evidence shows that yes, we are doing things globally. There is progress, but it's way too little, way too late. It's too slow. Our political leaders, our business leaders are letting us down. So where is the change going to come from? All right, so I want to now say that we need a systemic socio-ecological transformation. And this is not a new thing. This has been talked about a lot, not necessarily in climate science or in agriculture, but in social sciences. The way in which we're fighting climate change is falling short. So the research and all of the things that are happening at the United Nations, the COPs, and all of these things that are happening, and every time it's just a talk shop and people get frustrated. But those things need to continue because they are making an impact. But it's not enough. We need to ramp up our social participation. And I firmly believe that that is where the solution lies. We need societal shifts, but those are not going to happen when people are feeling threatened. They're feeling that their lives, the way they live their lives is being reduced or threatened. and they are fearful, they are not going to take action. We need to come up with something that provides hope, that is a win-win solution. Things that we should be doing anyway in our communities, that we should pursue, even if the worst climate change futures don't materialize. So these are things around a safe, healthy environment where everybody is fed, everybody has water and food, and a clean air to breathe. So most of the actions that we need to take are known. We actually know what we need to do, but not individuals can't do them by themselves. And that, I think, is where people just give up and they say, I don't have the agency. Whatever I do isn't going to make any difference. And that is where we need to be coming to collective action and figuring out how we're going to do this as collectives. And I'm so excited to be speaking to faith communities here, because I do think that, especially in this country where many, many people have faith and are in communities, there is already that basis of hope, of caring, of community, of collective action that can form the basis of real action on climate change. And there are pockets in churches of people doing this, but I think we can really scale it up if we can figure out how to do it. I want to now come to somebody who has been a huge personal inspiration to me, Professor Catherine Hayhoe. She's a Canadian atmospheric scientist and one of the world's top climate change scientists. She says, I write about the things I'm interested in. This is on her website, on her blog. She's a great communicator as well. She says, the fascinating nuances of climate science, why a changing climate matters to real people, and how we're going to solve it, and what faith has to do with fixing this global challenge. She came from, her parents were missionaries and teachers, science teachers, missionaries in South America. She grew up in areas of great poverty, went back to Canada, studied atmospheric sciences, and is absolutely passionate about bringing this down to ground level to the people and solving this problem. She's an evangelical Christian, and she does so much in fact, she's doing more of communicating now with people on the ground, with congregations, with people from all walks of life, communicating the climate change science rather than just doing the science herself. And I've learned so much from what she says, how we can approach this. Sorry. Okay, I'll leave that up a little bit. She says, what is the best weapon against climate change? And she says it's hope. This is on a blog she put out in 2023. She says, yes, the data is telling us the planet is warming, the science is clear, but our future is also in our hands. We can't just sit back and say it's inevitable, we can't do anything about it. But we have three choices, and she quotes somebody to say here, we have three choices. We can mitigate, which means we can reduce the problem that's causing it, in other words, greenhouse gases. We can adapt, which we are already doing. We're going to do a little bit of both, but probably not enough, which means that there will be some suffering. And that brings me to this slide. Yes, all three of those things have to happen in various amounts in the mix. But she says the more mitigation we do, the quicker we can act now, the less adaptation will be required and the less suffering there will be. This for her is all about people and suffering and preventing that suffering. We can prevent many deaths and people falling more into poverty and insecure livelihoods. She says when we realize that the future is in our hands, that means we can make a difference. That is what our hope is based on. I want to now turn to what is happening maybe in South Africa, and I want to draw on something that Professor Martin de Wit says in his book. I don't know how well known this book is. I came across it online a little while ago, and I know Professor Martin de Wit. He and I worked on a project on climate change and food security for the whole of the SADC region, and that was about 12 years ago. It was a wonderful collaboration, and I have great respect for him. He's also a theologian. So he's concerned about creation care and how do we bring this to people in our congregations. He wants to support scholars in developing a biblical foundation for creation care in this book. But what I think I just want to highlight in what he says is that verskeie studies bevestig dat Christene uiteenlopende idees het oor hoe om op kwessies soos die omgewingskrisis, klimaatsverandering, die belang van biodiversiteit en natuurbewaring te reageer. Hulle reaksies wissel van 'n diepe besef van rentmeesterskap of tot felle vyandigheid. Do I need to translate that? I think what he's just saying is that even within the Christian communities worldwide, everywhere, there is this divide of people who have very opposing views on climate change, on the environment, and our role in that. It just made me wonder. It's how are we going to solve that problem? How are we going to get people to come together? And I think Christian communities, and especially religious leaders, have an incredible opportunity here. I know that many religious leaders in South Africa, SAFC is one example. I worked with SAFC also about 10 years ago. Wonderful work on trying to activate Christians and other people of faith to become more active, to do something about these challenges that we have. But I came across the study that, this is in the USA, and I'm not sure about South Africa, but some of my experience of talking to farmers and their communities and their religious congregations that they live in as well, it appears to me that there's been a bit of a failure of leadership in the churches. And this study shows that can be reversed actually quite quickly, quite easily. And what the study, it was a very big survey of Christian leaders across the USA, different denominations, asking them various questions around climate change and so on. Nearly 90% of Christian leaders accept climate change, and most believing that human activity is a major contributor. 90%. Their congregation members, who were also surveyed, only thought that a fifth of their leaders had those views. So nearly half of these Christian leaders have never mentioned it to their congregations. And only a quarter have mentioned it more than once or twice. So they're holding back for whatever reason. There are many reasons why people may be holding back. But the leaders are actually understanding the risks, but they're not talking about it. And then when the people who were surveyed, the congregants were surveyed, and they were told that 90% of their leaders actually do believe that climate change is happening and that we can do something about it, they changed their minds very, very quickly because they trust their leaders. They listen to their church leaders. And then it made them believe that, yes, Christians can take climate action that is consistent with their church's values. So it's not a difficult thing, but we're not having those conversations. And what the study says at the end in the abstract is religious leaders have a unique power to influence climate action, but only if they let their beliefs be known. If they vocalize their acceptance of human-made climate change, they can correct widespread misperceptions, foster dialogue, and encourage action in ways that secular authorities may struggle to achieve. And I just say yes. We have been, as scientists, struggling to make any impact on action, on real action. And why is that? I think it's because people don't respond to data and knowledge and science the way we present it necessarily. They want to know what it means for their lives, their families, their kids' future, their immediate environment, what things they love, the things they care about. And Professor Catherine Hayhoe, oh, I'm sorry, I keep on changing those. Professor Catherine Hayhoe she's an absolute expert communicator on these things, and she's sharing her experiences of communicating with the rest of the world now. She says that hope begins with a conversation today. I'm going to have a few slides where I can just say, yes, that is how it works. When I speak to farmers, I've made it my job not only to be a scientist. In fact, most of my time now is spent going to farmers, to farming communities, and having discussions, having those conversations about climate change. And that is the first step. The key to connecting with people around this is to identify the shared values and the shared concerns, bring it right down to their families, their communities, people in need, a safe and healthy environment for all, the food we eat, things that they grapple with every single day. It doesn't help talking about whatever's happening in the Arctic and the polar bears and the coral reefs. It doesn't mean anything to them in practice, especially more vulnerable people and people who are literally living on the edge. And many farmers are living on the edge. They live from season to season. They understand that the science is necessary, but they want to connect on a real basis. There are solutions that clean up our air and water, that grow local economies and jobs, encourage nature to thrive, and leave us all better off, not worse. Who doesn't want that? And that is all that we need to do to solve climate change, really. And at their core, every major world religion teaches its adherents to be responsible for all living things. We've heard a lot of this in the last 2 days. All living things that share our home, and to care for those less fortunate than ourselves. And these are the values that are needed for climate action. But as I said, we can't do this individually, so we still need the collective. We need to get active. And if I just think of congregations, what a wonderful opportunity where we already have groups within congregations. Catherine Hayhoe is part of a group called Moms in Science. It's a moms group. Moms who are concerned about their children and the future of their children and the next generation. And they talk about climate change in that space. It could be a Bible study group. It could be a new group within a congregation. It could be joining an outside group that has the same shared values, or maybe another denomination, share resources and do these things together. Whatever it is, every single person, and we say this to our farmers as well, every single person can actually make a difference. And we just need to give people that hope and encourage them that they do have agency. They have skills. So whether it's something to do with gardening, we heard many people in this room do garden, love gardening, growing their own food. People love cooking, soup kitchens, people reducing food waste, planting trees. For people who have skills and experience in dealing with politicians or dealing with a local municipality, talk to them, have those conversations about climate change. Why aren't you guys talking about climate change? Why aren't you fixing our water problem? Why aren't you fixing the sanitation problem, etc.? Children's programs, people who are good with children, and most moms are part of children's programs at some point in their life with their children. Encourage them to start talking to children about these things, and not in a fearful way, but in a way that says this is the world we live in and this is what we can do about it. Joining volunteer disaster services. I have colleagues at the Department of Agriculture who work in disaster. One lady who is such an inspiration to me, she's one of our chief directors now for rural development, but she came from the Provincial Disaster Management Centre. She was the director for disaster response. She has spent her life, she started as a volunteer, driving an ambulance here in Macassar, driving an ambulance, and then working her way up in the disaster space, and just caring for people, caring when things have happened, making sure that people are looked after and etc. Wonderful people that are busy with these things, and they do bring these experiences into their faith communities. Renewable energy installation. We have technical people, young men in our congregations, people who do these things for a living. Ask them to help put up a solar panel on the church buildings. There are many various ways that people can do action together and have fun together, laugh together, eat together, share time, get to know each other, and don't make it this terrible. I mean, the first few slides I showed this morning, yes, it is a crisis, but we're not going to stop there because we can actually do a lot about it. The next section of my slides is where I really want to talk a little bit about the experiences I've had in my job. So in the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, in 2014 already, we started developing a climate change response strategy and adaptation plan. That plan it's a systemic plan. It cuts across even into health and into the water sector and etc. But it's based on landscapes, people living in landscapes, people who are farming, who have nature on their doorstep, who have other communities that also need water, that share the water resource, etc. So it's a holistic plan. It's divided into these 4 areas. The one is literally what happens on the ground, on the farm, practices, climate smart practices for farming, looking after our resources, water, energy, and all of these things. That's the green bit. The orange, the pink bit is the disaster risk reduction and management. So disasters happen in agriculture quite often, and how to strengthen that side. Strengthening strategic research and knowledge management, and then good governance and joint planning. And I'm going to just say a few things about that last one. What does joint planning look like? What is working together? What does partnership look like? And we really put a lot of emphasis on that last one there, because that is really how things are going to change, how we can encourage climate action in agriculture. Oh, sorry. There we go. All right, the first one that I want to mention, I'm going to have 3 slides on 3 different events that we organized in the last 2 years as the Department of Agriculture, as part of the climate change program. And in all 3 of these, I want to, the common theme for these 3 events was that we brought people together from diverse backgrounds, but on a certain theme that, for example, this first one is on disaster risk reduction and decision makers and leadership. Another one is on farmers themselves and rivers, looking after their river systems, and the other one is on the youth. On each of these slides, I'm going to just point out that what has really worked for us, we found, is to take these people out of their everyday situation. You take them out of the office, out of their structures where they feel constrained, where they feel they can't talk, they can't open up. Take them right away into another space where preferably they stay together for 2 days. Sometimes it's only 1 day, but in this case it was 2 days. We brought all these leaders together in Vredendal for 2 days. They are just not distracted by their normal office challenges, by their cell phones. We're actually living together. We're having deep conversations. We are able to connect, get to know each other, eat together, bride together, and have conversations around disasters and climate change. And that safe space is so important, and that is where you have the best conversations. That's where you make connections. And now, when agriculture needs support or needs help in partnerships to work with disaster management people in Cape Town, we know these people. We can pick up the phone, we know them, we know who they are, we understand each other, we have the same concerns and the same values. And at that point, at this particular one, the brief, what we did in those 2 days was very intensive discussions, group discussions around what have we learned from the big drought in 2015 to 2018? What are the lessons we've learned from that? What has really worked? What have the farmers done that has really worked, that has taken us forward in the face of climate change, in the face of these disasters? What are those things? Let's help them scale up those things that do work. But also, what are the barriers? What are the things that didn't work? What are the things where we failed, where we could have done better in those floods and droughts, etc.? And then what are we going to do about it together as a partnership? And we came up with a prioritized list that we're now working on together. And those barriers often are access to resources, financial support. The water is always one of the top priorities, and laws and regulations. Those are things we can actually address. And then the farmers are dealing with the other things. But we need to give them support to make sure that they can introduce those practices that have made them more resilient to drought now. The second example is something I've been involved with now since 2022, and my colleague Rudolf Ruscher, who is the manager for the Cape Winelands Land Care Program, came up with this idea. He had the same issue with, we know all these things, we know what needs to be done, but how are we going to work with the farmers? How are we going to let them drive this and buy in and take the actions that are necessary? And he said, you know what, we're going to put them all in a bus for a whole day, and we're going to take them to a river system, and we're going to share time together, and we're going to talk about these issues. Nothing, everything can be said. It's a safe space. They're away from their farms. They're away from their other things that hold them back. Now they can talk openly. We can look at the system. We can show them this is what's been done. This is where the issues are. What is your role in this? And how are you, as a collective of farmers along this whole river system, going to work together to make this system a healthier system again that can withstand extremes of drought and flooding? And it's in their interests, and they know that. And what happens is that the farmers, they also, many of them do know each other already, but they also get to know some of the experts. So I come along as the climate change expert, and other people come along with other expertise. We talk about climate change, and I show them that in this system, we expect this to be happening. This is what's already happened, and these are the things we can expect in future. And we talk about it, and it's wonderful. And then at the end, we have a braai. As I said, when in doubt, have a braai, eat together, share a meal, and share a laugh. And that is an amazing, and we've done probably about 20 of these now, and they are the most amazing experiences, and the farmers are very, very grateful and really benefiting from this approach. And the last one, and that is one that is really close to my heart, I started the Climate Change and Agriculture Youth Summits in 2022. We've had 3 so far, 2022, 23, 24. And in each case, we had more than 100 young people between 18 and 35 They're all people chosen because they are either already in agriculture or they're interested in a career in agriculture. There's some connection with either agriculture or food. Some of them are farmers, some of them are students, some are already working in government, and a very wide range of backgrounds. But what we took them away for 2 days. We, as I said, take them away, not in a classroom situation, not in a government building, take them to a nice place where they feel they can have fun, they get to know each other, we share all our meals together, and it's very much those conversations, not just between us and the youth, and we have walked away from this thing of teaching them about climate change and teaching them about solutions. What we say is, what is your lived experience? How do you see this as a young person? Are you fearful? What are your emotions about this? And then at the end of the 2 days, we ask them, where do you think your role is in being part of the solution? And every single one of them is inspired and said, I do have a role in this, in my own career, in my own life, at work, in my family, in my community. And I feel encouraged now, and I have a network. I've made friends. I've met like-minded people with the same concerns, that I can maybe have a little online network with these people and share experiences and take this forward. So we are super excited by these youth summits, and it's something we're going to continue in future and try to reach as many people as we can, and across the province, other districts as well, not just around here. And then I also work very closely with my colleagues in disaster risk reduction and management in agriculture. We have a small unit that is responsible for supporting from an agricultural perspective when there are droughts and floods and many other things that happen. And I'm working very closely with them. So for the last 3 years now, I joined them on what they called a risk reduction risk assessment engagements with the farmers across all the districts across the province. So we go to the farmers, we go to where they are, we get together, usually smallholder farmers, often also commercial farmers and a mix of them. And they help us to identify what their risks are, what are they already experiencing, what are their skills and their tools that they already bring to the table, but what is it they need from government in terms of further support and further resources. And we have this conversation over a whole day, and it is very, very enriching. We tell them, I usually give a small lecture about climate change, and then we ask them, what are your experiences? Does it match what I'm telling you about what the science is saying? And they'll say yes or no, or usually it's more nuanced than what we think, and they give us a lot of granularity of how things are affecting them. And then more importantly, what can we do? Sometimes it's not very expensive things that can make a big difference. Fix the borehole. Quite often it's simple things like that. It's simple things government can do that isn't going to take a huge budget. That can be done in a few months. And we ask them to prioritize, what is it you want from us? And then we say, we can't fund all of this, but yes, we can fix the borehole, or we can do this, or we can do that. And that is the way we try to help them build resilience. But what I want to show on this slide, is one of the farmer groups that we had this engagement with up in the West Coast. My experience working with farmers, and not just in the Western Cape, but in previous work that I've done in Lesotho and in Mozambique and other places, is farmers in Southern Africa are deeply religious people. They are, most of them, very tied to very, very connected and embedded in their families, in their communities, and their environments. And they're often criticized by people who don't understand farming for destroying the environment. That is so unfair. Farmers are deeply connected with their environment. They work with their environment every single day. They manage extreme levels of risk. I don't think, apart from fishing, there isn't any other profession in this world that is exposed to more risk than farming. They take on this risk every single season. They don't know whether there's going to be a harvest. And they are conservative for that reason. They can't just change their practices just because somebody from Cape Town comes and tells them, you must do this kind of smart agri-farming practice. That's not how it works. They are dealing with a whole lot of factors that they have to put into a big pot, mix up, look at the risks, what is in their means to actually do something about it, and then make decisions. So they make decisions based on many, many other things as well, but they are conservative. They will not just change something for the sake of it, or because there's a global climate crisis. They will change things if it benefits their farming, their production, their survival, feeding their families and their communities. they are resilient. There's